Tank, cool name. And that's exactly what I said about the GWM Tank 300 Hybrid at its Australian launch earlier this year. But now we've got the petrol version which has rolled through the Chasing Cars garage ahead of its own local debut. Now, if you're sitting on the other side of the screen thinking, hang on, that Tank 300 looks a bit like a budget love child between a Jeep Wrangler and a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, well, you wouldn't be too far from the truth. So let's start with the budget bit. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
Unsurprisingly, the petrol versions kick in at lower price points than the petrol electric hybrids, and the whole range kicks off at $46,990 for the Luxe, and that's drive away. That's around 10 grand less than the hybrid versions, and that really is cheap as chips for a 4x4 ladder frame all-terrain vehicle. So we're already well below the $250,000 that you need to fork out for a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, and still well under the circa $80,000 mark for a Jeep Wrangler 4-door. However, this particular car is the Ultra and it wants for a little bit more coin. Still, the all-you-can-eat Ultra version clocks in at just $50,990 drive away. For context, that's about the same as the list price for the Toyota Fortuner GX with nav, which is pretty basic. It's also about 5 grand more affordable than the Isuzu MU-X LSM. And those are really the rivals that the Tank 300's gunning for. Nice paintwork such as this dusk orange does cost you an extra $595. However, whichever colour you choose, the Chinese SUV does look very impressive in the metal. But what we want to find out is it any good when you scratch below the surface? And more importantly, is it good enough for the cut price outlay that it asks for? At almost 4.8 metres in length and around 1.9 metres wide and tall, the GWM Tank 300 sort of straddles that middle ground between medium and large SUV, although GWM does call it medium. And given that it weighs in at over 2.1 tonnes, there is a lot of it. With its LED headlights and these 18-inch wheels filling the guards out a little bit better than the base version's 17s, the Ultra does have a fairly distinctive style and a lot of presence. Doesn't look cheap, and it certainly seems to be built well enough, although frankly it doesn't have the sort of charisma of the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon or the Jeep Wrangler. In fact, in some eyes it might actually look like a bit of a facsimile of a real off-roader, despite the fact that it actually has some fairly hardcore stuff packed in. It's built with ladder frame construction and has 224 mils of ground clearance. And you get an off-road friendly 33 degrees of approach angle and 34 degrees of departure angle. And I know from the hybrid drive earlier this year that it can wade up to 700 millimeters of water without choking on its off-road ambitions. It also fits electronically controlled mechanical LSDs on both axles if you do stump up for the Ultra version. There's also proper dual range drive and a host of all-terrain drive modes if the sense of adventure does consume you. When I did drive the hybrid a few months back, it was exclusively off-road, but what I really want to find out today is the other side of the Tank 300 pitch, what it's like as a luxury SUV on a budget. So let's check that out, starting with the cabin, because if this Tank 300 has any luxury aspirations at all, it would want to be significantly better than the Thai-built rivals that want for similar money. First impressions of the cabin from the front row are very good, at least for what it is and what it's gunning for. Sure, some of the plastic garnish bits look a bit, well, plasticky, but the luxury off-road vibes come thick and fast in this high-spec version. The bluff square theme is really on point, and it's not unlike what you would find in Jeep Wrangler or Ford's Bronco. And again, presentation with what they're working with is very good. There's a real sense of occasion in here, and that's really helped by the use of a lot of soft touch surfaces that balance out some of the hard plastics. The seats are Nappa leather accented rather than the fake stuff that you do get in the lower grade version. And I really do like these black quilted door trim inserts that really do give the doors a bit of a lift. I do also love these really chunky handles on the door and on the dash fascia, and like a true 4x4, you do get grab handles on the pillars. Now, you don't have to squint too hard to see Mercedes-Benz influence in here, including the hilariously oversized turbine air vents. And the steering wheel, though it's more low rent than what you will find in a Benz. But in other areas, the Euro-tinged theme works particularly well, especially when it comes to the digital display. The screens are both 12.3 inch and they are quite sharp and do have nice consistency when it comes to look and fonts. They're probably more minimalist than they are fancy or pretty, but they do really anchor the premium feel in the cabin. However, the media system itself is a bit of a mixed bag. Most of the content looks pretty good, but it is quite slow to respond, and for some reason the petrol versions do not get digital radio. You do get inductive phone charging, though the petrol versions do only offer wide Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You do have to step up to the Ultra Hybrid version to get wireless CarPlay. On the plus side, the 9-speaker Infinity branded audio is quite good, and the 360 camera system is quite fantastic. It really is a quality inclusion for a rig that costs around 50 grand. You do get this weird sort of pistol grip transmission controller, though it is quite easy to get used to, and all of your drive modes and dual mode selection, as well as the electronic diff lock controls, are all placed logically and easy to access. You also get this nice little sort of dual layer center console, which has a little cubby bin that slides back to expose 2 cup holders. Details apart, it is a really nice vibe in here. It feels nice and airy and roomy, and there's plenty of cabin width. And it's certainly a little less claustrophobic in here than you will find in some of the cramped feeling Thai-built rivals. Some of that is helped by the upright A-pillars and windshield, as well as the standard fit glass roof. And it does afford really good outward visibility here. All in all, it feels like it'd be a comfy place to spend long hours on road trips. Right, let's check out row 2. Row 2 accommodation is really very good. You get a lot of knee room, a lot of headroom. The floor, despite the tail shaft, is almost flat, and they've done a fantastic job back here. The seats are really comfy, the contours are really nice, and it's very adult friendly in the back. And I think part of the reason why row 2 works so well is that GWM wasn't tempted to try and squeeze 3 rows and 7 seats in here. And as a result, the packaging is really smart and nicely resolved. Another real plus in here is that the windowsills are actually quite low, so smaller kids get a good view of the outside world on long road trips. It's also well executed in the back here, so they haven't skimped on the quality of the door trims, and the backs of the front seats aren't hard plastic. It's all trimmed and it's quite nice. It's also full of nice appointments, so you do get air vents in the back here and a couple of USB-C ports, as well as a nice little phone cubby. And in the fold-down armrests, you get your obligatory dual cup holders. And overall presentation is just really nice in here, particularly when it comes down to just the double stitching and just the general airy ambience. When it comes to ownership, the Tank 300 is covered by GWM's 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty. Consumption-wise, the petrol version is quite thirsty, and it comes with a 9.5 litre combined claim, although we've been touring around with it for the last week and it's averaging about 12.5. The hybrid version, well, that's still at 8.4 litres, which isn't terribly good for a petrol-electric hybrid. However, both versions will run on 91 octane fuel. And when it comes to cap price servicing, the pricing for its packages are on the screen in front of you. It does have a rear swinging door, which seems like a great idea until the first time you try to reverse park into a supermarket, although it is necessary because the rear wheel hangs off the back. GWM doesn't make any claims about rear boot space, but to my eye looks about 380 or 400 litres. You also get a nice flat floor because there's no third row to stow that's going to eat into luggage space. It's also nicely carpeted, as well as a 220 volt 3-pin in case you wanted to power up that coffee machine out of the camping site. Right, let's take it for a spin. The first thing that strikes you about the Tank 300 petrol on road is just really how smooth and quiet it is. And a lot of that is down to conditioning. That's because here in Australia, we so often associate the all-terrain experience with diesel clatter. The GWM favours petrol and petrol-electric hybrid power just naturally lends itself to a more serene driving experience. Both the petrol and the hybrid versions of the Tank 300 fit 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engines, although they are not the same on specification. The unit that they fit in this petrol version is 162 kilowatts and 380 newton meters, while the version in the hybrid gets more power at 180 kilowatts, albeit with the same amount of torque. Why? Who knows, but when it comes to comparison with its key rivals such as the Fortuner, this tank does outpunch it on power. However, it doesn't really get anywhere near the 500 newton meters offered in the Toyota. Where it comes up a little bit short though is in brake towing, because the petrol Tank 300 is only rated at 2.5 tons braked, whereas its rival like the Toyota Fortuner is more around the 3200 mark. But the upshot is that it's measurably more refined than any of its oiler rivals, as well as the petrol-powered Jeep Wrangler. The engine's paired quite nicely with an 8-speed conventional automatic, and the powertrain's fluid nature really does lend itself to that luxury vibe. However, it is not terribly quick, and that's not all that surprising given that the little 2-litre turbo is lugging around over 2.1 tonnes, and that's before you start loading up the Tank 300 with loved ones and luggage. But in terms of real-world urban response, it is actually quite good with a fair amount of torque in the mid-range, and it's almost downright swift when you're driving at 1-up with no luggage or passengers. So let's face it, it is no workhorse, but it does settle in really nicely as a luxury cruiser on road, and one that does pack a bit of off-road flexibility should the situation command it. Its cushy nature extends through to the ride comfort, which, much like its powertrain, is vastly more polished and pleasant than its ladder frame competitors. The Tank 300 sits on a double wishbone front and a live axle coil-sprung rear end, and it's the pliant tuning and those chubby tyres that really do a great job of filtering out some of the nasties that are both small and large. It's not flaccid either in body control, at least when you're plugging along in a straight line, and it is quite disciplined in its tuning. It doesn't pitch around in the rear like some ute-based SUVs, and in general, it just really filters out the small fizzy stuff and any of those larger jolts. And the suspension is, like much of the rest of the package, very quiet, which really brings that sense of solidity. Sure, there's not a lot of life in the steering, and it is probably a little lighter than it should be. But the upshot is that it does suit the Tank 300's hassle-free nature very well. However, there are a couple of shortcomings. Despite the fact that outward visibility is very good, you do get these very thick A-pillars and mirrors that are planted right next to it, which do present a fair bit of a blind spot. And when you do get up a head of steam and you start plugging on, it can shimmy around a little bit if you do hit a pothole. Generally the controls are very good, but I must say I really dislike these indicators that once you turn them on, they're just almost impossible to turn off again. But probably the biggest annoyance is that the safety systems do have a tendency to trigger when it's unwarranted. And in order to turn those off, you really have to start digging through the multimedia screen sub-menus. The Tank 300 does offer a lot of active safety. So up front you get autonomous emergency braking, forward collision warning, and cross traffic alert, and all of those systems are mirrored when you're going in reverse. In terms of lane assistance, you get lane departure warning, lane keeping, and lane centering, and it comes with a 5-star NCAP rating. Rounding safety off is the fact that Tank 300 fits 7 airbags, including a front center unit, and you also get rear ISOFIX on the outboard seating. We do hope to get both the petrol and the hybrid versions of the GWM Tank 300 through the Chasing Cars garage once this petrol version does hit the showrooms. And after trying the hybrid version off-road, we really did want to see how the breed fares on the hot mix. And that's because the price point at where 300 is pitched, it really hopes to lure buyers well outside enthusiast 4x4 circles. As an urban and highway proposition, this SUV does behave a lot more like a passenger car than, well, a tank. It is vastly more polished and refined than a Jeep Wrangler and measurably more attainable than a G-Wagon. And firming up its pitch is that when you get anywhere near the big smoke, it's much more pleasant to live with than the MUX, Fortuner or Pajero Sport versions that want for similar money. However, the Tank 300 is not perfect, and in some areas there's room for improvement. But importantly, when you do dig in, it is a surprisingly solid and appealing machine, especially as a comfortable cruiser with a sense of occasion that is sprinkled with plenty of bells and whistles. Because of that, it punches pretty hard for the money that it wants for. So that's what I think, but how about you? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.